By 1899, the age of outlaws and gunslingers was at an end. America was becoming a land of laws. Even the West had mostly been tamed. A few gangs still roamed, but they were being hunted down and destroyed. One of those that remained was the Van der Linde gang, led by Dutch Van der Linde, on the run from the Pinkertons who were chasing them down after a robbery gone wrong in Blackwater. Dutch leads the group through a snowstorm which they use to get the Pinkertons off their trail. He takes them into a cabin where the gang's father figure Hosea, as well as Charles, Lenny, Bill, Javier, Tilly, Miss Grimshaw, Molly, Karen, Pearson, the alcoholic Reverend Swanson, Uncle, Mary Beth, Herr Strauss, Abigail, and her son, young Jack, all get themselves warm, and the wounded Davy can take his last breath before passing away. Dutch takes this as an opportunity to give a heartfelt speech to the gang, saying that he's sorry that they lost Davy and Jenny, and that if he could swap places with them, he would. Mac and Sean are lost, we don't know if they're okay or not. So Dutch pulls the gang together and asks them to stay strong as Dutch takes Arthur, his right-hand man, and goes looking for John and Micah, who he sent scouting ahead. The duo spot Micah, who says he lost John in a snowstorm, but mentions that he found a cabin full of people that they can get food from. Dutch thought he'd talk to them alone, seeing as it seems a lot less threatening than three armed men. While hidden, Micah notices a dead body, so they realize they're bad people. So Arthur and Micah begin firing, starting a shootout. After killing all of them, who turns out to be O'Driscoll's, a rival gang, the trio rob them of food and steal a horse before Arthur and Dutch hear a ruckus coming from the cabin. Turns out there's a woman who's still alive. She was defending herself against Micah, who was taunting her, as Micah set the cabin on fire while messing with her. Luckily, Dutch was able to convince her that they won't harm her. They take her with them, and as her home burns down, she reveals to them her name, Mrs. Sadie Adler. The corpse was her husband. The damn O'Driscolls made her into a widow. As they got back, Dutch got the ladies to look after Sadie as Dutch pulls aside the co-founder of the gang and his oldest friend Hosea to discuss a train robbery he found out those O'Driscolls were planning. Then after having a bit of a rest, Abigail asks Arthur to look for John, Jack's father, who hasn't been seen in 2 days. Although there appears to be some animosity between the men, Arthur agrees, so he and Javier go to track down John. Arthur's distaste for John stems from the fact that when Jack was born, he abandoned the gang and his family for an entire year before returning to open arms, seeing as he, along with Arthur, were the first members of the gang after Dutch and Hosea. Arthur still hasn't fully forgiven him for that. Anyway, they locate him having been mauled by a pack of wolves, so they grab him and bring him back to Abigail and his son. After returning, Dutch, Bill, Arthur, Javier, and Micah all set off to find the O'Driscoll camp to get more information on the train robbery while also stealing food for the gang. Arthur and Dutch discuss how he and Colm O'Driscoll's rivalry came to be as bad as it is right now. You see, Dutch killed Colm's brother, and Colm killed Dutch's darling Annabelle. Nevertheless, Dutch reassured Arthur that this isn't about revenge, it's about surviving. However, when they get to the camp, Colm's nowhere to be seen, so they massacre the O'Driscolls that were there. Arthur and Bill find some dynamite which can come in handy for the train heist, as Dutch gathers information that they're stealing bonds of a man called Leviticus Cornwall from that train, so they can be sold off. As they were riding back, Dutch spots an O'Driscoll trying to escape, so Arthur lassos and hogties him so he can be brought back alive to aid with intel. Soon after, Dutch rallies the troops, all except John, who was still wounded, to hijack this train. But before they do, Hosea expresses his concern to Dutch about his priorities, suggesting that they should be running further away from Blackwater. But Dutch insists to his oldest friend that running would be pointless without money. All the money they had was still stashed in Blackwater where they were still wanted men. However, when Bill set up the dynamite to stop the train, it doesn't blow up. So Arthur and Lenny are forced to jump aboard to stop it in its tracks. Arthur and Charles then blow up the doors to enter the carriage where they collect the bonds before they flee. Before long, the gang are ready to relocate, still on the run from the law. They go to a horseshoe overlook near Valentine to set up camp. Then Dutch reiterates that everyone has to pull their own weight to bring some food or cash to the camp by reminding them of there being a town nearby to help with that. That's when Hosea reminds Dutch that it was in fact Micah's foolish idea for the ferry robbery in Blackwater. He got into Dutch's head, which led to him having to kill an innocent woman. So he doesn't want anyone to do anything too crazy, reckless, or illegal to bring more unwanted attention to them. After that rousing speech, 3 of the girls, Karen, Tilly, and Mary Beth, accompany Arthur and Uncle to Valentine, the nearby town, looking for people to swindle. When a passerby recognizes Arthur as someone who was at Blackwater during the robbery, Arthur is forced to chase him down to threaten him, so he doesn't go snitching. After Uncle gets the girls back home, Arthur goes and meets Javier in the bar while he's putting his moves on a couple of ladies. That's when Bill being Bill gets in a bar fight. The others help him out onto a big fella, chucks Arthur out the window to the streets of Valentine, where they do a bit of mud wrestling as Arthur messes him up before a very clean Dutch shows up with a friend of the gang, Josiah Trelawney. He lets the group know that he knows where Sean is being held by a bunch of bounty hunters, so Javier and Charles join Josiah in spying on them to find the right time to save their talkative Irish friend. Meanwhile, Dutch is trying to get information from Kieran, the O'Driscoll they nabbed, but the bugger was being resilient. So, by threatening to geld him, Dutch gets him to pinpoint and bring Arthur, John, and Bill to Colm's whereabouts. Although he wasn't there as he had thought, Kieran saved Arthur's life, so the trio let him live and allow him to slowly integrate in with the gang. Herr Strauss then sends the gunslinger to collect some money for the gang from people he had lent money to with the promise of interest. One of them, Thomas Downs, was seriously ill and was unable to pay it because he was in crushing debt. Arthur beat the living daylight out of him as he coughed up blood in his face. Arthur warned him and his family to get the money because they aren't a charity before returning to camp to tell Herr Strauss of that encounter. Even though Arthur tells him not to lend money to those types of people again, Strauss responds by telling him that people who aren't desperate unfortunately aren't interested in his propositions. In the coming days, as Arthur's having a conversation with Dutch and his obsessive lover Molly about the good old days and about how times have changed, Lenny rushes into camp out of breath, telling him that Mike has been arrested for murder. They're going to have him killed. Although Arthur has a severe hatred for the guy, after Dutch pleads with him, he agrees to help him. But first, it's time to get rid of Lenny's stress. The duo go on a night out together and bond. In fact, Arthur gets so wasted on that night out that after taking a piss outside and heading back inside, he starts seeing Lenny everywhere. So much so that he even saw Lenny shagging himself. That's when the real Lenny shows up and the two start slapping each other before nearly drowning someone out back. Although they get caught and the law runs after them and tackles and arrests them. In the morning they pay to get out of jail and all's good. Other than that massive headache, of course. Arthur later pays a visit to Strawberry where they were ready to hang Micah. Even though he was still toying with the idea of letting him die due to their differences, he breaks Micah out of jail as they go on a rampage, massacring the entire town. Once they're in the clear, Arthur has a go at Micah, at which point Micah responds by apologizing to him and saying that whether he likes it or not, they're sons of Dutch, which makes them brothers, and sometimes brothers make mistakes. However, Micah doesn't want to head back just yet. He wants to bring back a peace offering to Dutch, so he heads off to search for it. Then Arthur goes to check on Trelawney, Charles, and Javier, who were spying on the bounty hunters that had Sean. Once Arthur arrived, they put their plan into motion. They follow their enemies as they're moving Sean to look for the best price they can get for their bounty, until they're out of the city, at which point the group ambush them so they can retrieve their brother from their grasp to return him back home. While back home, Arthur receives a letter from an old flame, Mary Linton, requesting his help. Turns out her younger brother joined a cult and left home. Believe it or not, Arthur Morgan has a soft side, so he tracks him down and brings him back to Mary. Arthur watches them board a train and it becomes clear through dialogue that there's still a lot of love for each other. It just didn't work out because of Arthur's life as an outlaw. After seeing them off and returning back to camp, Abigail asks Arthur to cheer Jack up a bit because his father's useless. So Arthur takes the kid fishing nearby, where they get interrupted by agents Milton and Ross of the Pinkertons, who obviously recognize Arthur. They are asking him about Dutch in exchange for his freedom because they know a man matching his description robbed Leviticus Cornwall's train, a wealthy man funding the Pinkertons now to go after Dutch. But obviously Arthur remains loyal and says that he got no idea where he is, which is when Milton mentions that he murdered Mac, another member of the gang who got lost after the Blackwater heist. This causes the two to threaten each other before the agents go on their merry way. Once he's sure they're not following them, Arthur returns Jack to camp so he can inform Dutch of what occurred. He remains calm because he believes that they're just trying to get them to do something rash and stupid. After a train robbery with John, Charles and Sean, Arthur helps Micah performing a robbery of his own so he can return to camp. With his help, Dutch then comes up with an area, Dewberry Creek, where they can relocate to. Arthur and Charles clear out the area so the others can join them in their new home, hopefully getting further away from those pesky Pinkertons. Once they're settled in, old friends Dutch and Hosea take Arthur to a creek close by to go fishing to help them chill out. But on their way they bump into Sheriff Gray, who they make friends with under fake names. This allowed them to free Josiah Trelawney, who they saw the sheriff had arrested. He informs the trio of what was going on around these parts. Apparently two families, the Grays and the Braithwaites, had been feuding for generations over gold. And obviously Dutch wants a piece of that, but in the meantime the three continue on their fishing trip, fishing and singing away, reminiscing on old times when Arthur was but a youngling before returning to camp. In the following days, Arthur and John venture out to meet Dutch and Strauss at a saloon to do some business with some sheep. However, when John and Strauss go out to check on if there's any funny business going on, we finally meet the infamous Leviticus Cornwall, whose men has the duo at gunpoint. After the coward flees, Arthur and Dutch are able to move fast to save their comrades before getting the heck out of there. Arthur meets a Grey who has fallen in love with a Braithwaite, in a story very reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet. Seeing as this feud tickled Dutch's fancy, Arthur aided Beau in bringing Penelope his letters and gifts in the hope that eventually there would be something in it for them. But it's not just Arthur, Dutch has been working at it too. He, Arthur and Bill help Sheriff Gray steal a wagon load of the Braithwaite's moonshine. Luckily, due to their newfound friendship, the sheriff and his deputy gave them most of the booze, all according to plan. So after Arthur and Dutch race back to camp, Arthur pays a visit to the Downs family. Turns out the father had passed away from whatever illness he had, leaving the wife to hand Arthur whatever Strauss is owed. After that minor pit stop, Arthur and Hosea decide to pose as people who coincidentally came across the moonshine so they can sell the alcohol to the Braithwaites, the very people they stole it from. They ride to Braithwaite Manor run by Catherine Braithwaite, who agrees to buy the booze off Hosea. But she wants them to hand out the stuff for free in the saloon run by the Greys in Rhodes. After getting the whole saloon drunk, a local gang, the Lemoyne Raiders, show up and shoot up the place, claiming that they stole the alcohol they were going to purchase from the Braithwaites. Arthur and Hosea manage to get away when the old man says that he's going to take the leftovers to Catherine because he knows that they still need money before they can officially get out of these parts to somewhere nobody knows them. When Arthur discusses this with Dutch and Micah, they insist that everything is going as planned. All they've got to do is convince each family they're on their side before they can rob them both. Therefore, a few of them steal prized horses from Braithwaite Manor to help the Greys get back at them for the alcohol fiasco. On the other side of the fence, Arthur and Sean burn down the Greys' tobacco farm. But on an unrelated but potentially massive note, Pearson, the camp chef, ran into a couple of O'Driscolls who suggested a parlay. This could be big for them, since they already have the Pinkertons and Cornwall after them. They don't want to worry about the O'Driscolls too. This would certainly lighten the load, even though it's probably a trap, so Micah pushes the idea. Although reluctant since Cole murdered his beloved Annabelle, Dutch agreed and decided to give it a go, but only with Arthur on sniper duty. But during the meeting, Arthur gets approached and knocked out from behind by O'Driscolls. The meeting concluded and later Colm tortured Arthur, expecting full well that Dutch will come to rescue him. So he wants to nab the rest of the gang too, to hand them over to the law, expecting he'd get off scot-free. Arthur could not let that happen. So once Colm left, Arthur escaped, treated his wounds, recovered his weapons, and got on his horse. Even though he was unconscious, his loyal steed brought him back home where Dutch got Miss Grimshaw and the girls to look after him. After Arthur's all better, a bunch of the boys go to the Greys as they've got a job for them to do. While they're comfortably strolling through the town of Rhodes, poor Sean, who just got back home, got popped like a zit. It was the Greys. They had cottoned on that the gang were playing both sides. Regardless, Arthur, Micah and Bill shoot their way through the remainder of the Greys in town before having a go at each other for Sean's death. Arthur brought up that Micah was overconfident about their plan of playing both sides, while Micah stated that all Arthur did since he joined the gang was whine. Anyway, when they arrived back in camp, there was more trouble awaiting them. Jack's gone missing. Turns out the Braithwaite woman kidnapped him because she knew they stole her moonshine. Dutch assures Abigail that he'll return her son to her and rounds up every able fighter excluding Micah and Kieran to storm the Braithwaite mansion. With John on edge, the group roll up, lock and loaded, ready to kill every single one of Catherine's sons to get the boy back. And as promised, that's exactly what they do. But Jack's nowhere in sight. To get her to tell them where the boy is, they set the place alight to get intel from her. Apparently, she gave him to a very wealthy man named Angelo Bronte in Saint Denis. As they set off back to camp, Catherine Braithwaite runs back into the burning manor and presumably dies beside her son's dead bodies. Back in the camp, the group have a meeting to discuss getting the boy back. The others comfort John by saying that there's no way they'll hurt him. They took him to scare them. Nobody takes a boy to harm him. So Dutch acknowledges the trouble they got themselves in and says that once they got the boy, they'll get out of here. But before they can put their plan into fruition, their conversation gets interrupted by Agent Milton and Ross. Milton and Dutch have a fascinating argument about their conflicting ideologies. Milton says that America is a civilized land now, so there's no way they can allow the likes of them to act like basic decency is yet to be invented. To which Dutch responds that there is no such thing as civilized. There's only men that are so greedy that they have forgotten who they are and found only appetites. To which Milton says that doesn't excuse him killing and robbing whoever he wants while making himself the messiah of these lost souls around him. But anyway, he says that he wants to cut a deal. If Dutch gives himself up, he'll let the others live a free life. In which case, Dutch was ready to go with him, but there was no way any of the others were about to let that happen. So the Pinkertons left, assuring them that they'd be back with 50 men ready to fight. With that, Dutch sends Arthur and John to Shady Belle to find a new camp to move everyone closer to Saint Denis. After everyone moves in, Arthur and Dutch immediately visit the hustle and bustle city of Saint Denis. They track down Bronte, and Dutch, Arthur and John pay him a visit in his mansion. Despite some awkwardness, they actually come to an arrangement. He'll give Jack back to them, but only if Arthur and John do him a favour, because them butting into the liquor business negatively impacted his finance. There are a few grave robbers in the area, and Bronte's not happy about it because in his eyes, he runs this city. So, the duo find and kill the grave robbers before locating their stash and taking it back to Bronte. Luckily, nothing went wrong. Once the job was done, Jack was returned to them. Turns out, he was well looked after in Bronte's care, which is a relief. Anyway, they bring him back home to his mother as Dutch reveals that Bronte invited them to a garden party. But before they join high society, Arthur pays a visit to Mary. Her father, who never approved of Arthur, has been drinking, whoring and gambling, so Mary wants to watch him to see if he gets into any trouble. The pair stealthily follow him and catch him up to no good. He pawned off Mary's mother's brooch that she gave to Mary without her permission. Mary has a go at her father as Arthur chases down the guy he sold it to and gets it back so he can return it to Mary. While he was walking her home, Mary suggests that they go to the pictures, so they do. The two flirt and tease each other as they watch the show. Once it ended, Mary asked Arthur if it's too late for them. He was taken aback by that. She suggests that they can still run off together, but Arthur responds by mentioning that he's still got people to look after. But once they're good and they've got some money, they can run off into the sunset together. But till then, she heads off home in the tram, promising to write to him. Then the group go to Bronte's garden party to go networking. But when socializing with the mayor, Arthur overhears someone telling him about Leviticus Cornwall on the telephone. So Dutch gets Arthur to follow the guy. He locates some top secret confidential papers regarding Cornwall, which means it's time to make like a tree and split. In the morning after, Dutch informs Arthur of the ideas brewing in his head thanks to that evening of networking. An armed robbery on the Saint Denis bank, a trolley station, and a riverboat. And there's an Indian chief that seems to be having issues with the civilized world, which sounds all too familiar. So Dutch believes perhaps they can help them. One more big score and they can disappear forever. Ideal for Arthur as he has his plans with Mary. Trelawney was able to get himself, Arthur, Javier, and Herr Strauss on board the riverboat. They scammed the rich people at poker before stealing a watch. after which they got found out and a gunfight broke out, so they literally jumped ship and swim ashore with their winnings. Back at the camp sometime later, Sadie asks Dutch when she can go robbing with them. She isn't the sitting around doing chores type. He's very appreciative of her fiery and eager attitude. While he and Arthur were discussing robbing the tram station, which Bronte suggested was loaded with cash, they get interrupted by a decapitated Kieran riding into camp grasping his head. The O'Driscolls obviously found out that he switched sides and wanted to make a statement. Then those scum attack the gang. Arthur and the rest get everyone inside and defend their ground, but naturally Sadie's still on the outside going gung-ho on them, seeing as they ruined her life. So Arthur heads outside to join her in clearing out the remainder of those O'Driscolls that attacked them. Once they can take a breath, Dutch gets Reverend Swanson to bury Kieran someplace nearby and assures Arthur that Colm will pay for this. With everyone seemingly cornering them, they have to leave, but they still need some money first. Therefore, time is of the utmost urgence. Straight after the attack, Arthur, Dutch and Lenny go to rob the tram station, but there's very little money. Bronte stitched them up. So once they fled the law enforcement using the tram, which was part of their plan anyway, Dutch vows to get Bronte to learn his lesson, so it would make it easier for them to rob the bank, since it was clear that Bronte had the police on his side. Arthur, Dutch, John, Bill and Lenny storm his mansion and kidnap him. They take Bronte on a cute little romantic boat ride to the middle of a swamp, where he offers any of them $1,000 to shoot Dutch right now and save him. Obviously, no one budges, as Dutch drowns him before maniacally feeding him to the alligators, which some of them thought was a tad bit too far, and it was unlike him to do something that vicious. But now that it's done, Hosea can run through the plan for the bank heist. He and the women checked on the police and security of Saint Denis, and is confident that this can get done. Hosea suggests that he and Abigail can cause a distraction to give them time to do the robbery and escape. Dutch is unsure, but once he consults Arthur and he agrees, Dutch is more than on board with the idea, and they ride into Saint Denis. Once they see Hosea's distraction, they head inside with guns out, and Arthur gets the bank manager to open the vault by intimidating him. When they get the money though, they get into a bit of a pickle. They're met outside by Agent Milton and his men, who have caught Hosea and have him at gunpoint. Luckily Abigail's nowhere to be seen, she must have gotten away. Dutch's thirst for revenge on Bronte enabled the Pinkertons to pinpoint the gang's location, since one of his men probably snitched on them. After a back and forth between a desperate Dutch and Agent Milton negotiating Hosea's life, Milton's not having any of it. He murders Dutch's oldest friend and Arthur's father figure in cold blood, causing a gunfight. Since they're being overwhelmed, they climb up to the rooftops to get away, but while they're doing so, John gets arrested. The others keep running across the rooftops as poor young Lenny gets shot out of nowhere. But Dutch, Arthur, Charles, Javier, Bill and Micah find somewhere to hide out till nighttime. Once darkness approaches, the gang sneak their way onto the pier, but the path is blocked by Pinkertons. Charles, being his brave self, distracts them so the others can get on a boat and bribe the captain so they can get out of here. At least until the noise dies down. But out of nowhere, a storm approaches, and as a result, they get shipwrecked on the island of Guarma, and all the money that they had stolen was at the bottom of the ocean. They learn that the people of Guarma are being oppressed by a corrupt dictator called Alberto Fusar. So Dutch and the rest join in to help out the rebels to try and figure out their way off the island. In doing so, however, Arthur witnesses Dutch murder an innocent old lady right in front of him, for no logical reason at all. He said that he was sure that she'd snitch on them to Fusar. This was a stretch though, especially seeing as Dutch didn't even understand the language she was speaking. Anyway, the group aided the resistance by shooting a cannon and killing Fusar, before heading on board another boat and heading back to where they were wanted men. When Arthur heads back to the previous camp, there's no one to be seen, and when looking for clues for where they'd headed, some Pinkertons arrived searching the place. Now it's obvious why they left, they just have to find them. Arthur finds a cryptic letter written by Sadie suggesting they've gone to Lakai before getting out of the danger zone and joining the others. They're all relieved to see him. It seems after distracting those men, Charles got away and he and Sadie protected the others and got them someplace safe. Then Dutch comes in soon after, assuring that he'll get everyone out of this mess. But suddenly, they get ambushed by the Pinkertons, and this time, they have a machine gun. They're firing non-stop. Therefore, Arthur and Sadie flank them and take out the machine gunner, so Arthur can man the gun and wipe out the rest of them. When he gets off the machine gun, he's coughing profusely and is seriously out of breath, as Dutch announces that that they need to relocate immediately. Dutch says he needs more time to figure everything out, so when Abigail mentions that there's talk of hanging John, he dismisses it and insists he'll be fine and they'll free him when they have the time. After Dutch heads off with Micah, Abigail pleads with Arthur and Sadie to save John, and they agree. But prior to executing that idea, maybe that was a poor choice of words, while strolling around Saint Denis, Arthur collapses and is dragged to the doctors by a kind stranger. The doctor reveals to him that he has tuberculosis and will likely die soon from it. Suddenly, it clicks in Arthur's head. All the coughing and feeling progressively ill was because he caught TB from Thomas Downs, who he had beat up for money. Without telling anyone of his condition out of fear of perception, Arthur returns to camp to ask Dutch what they ought to do next. Dutch told Arthur that his eagerness reminds him of Hosea. With all that's been going on, they haven't had the chance to mourn. He says that they still need more money since all the money that they stole from the Saint Denis bank was at the bottom of the ocean. But yet again, they have to move first, so Arthur and Charles clear out a camp of Murphy brood. And they're lucky they got away with their lives because they're a group of brutal, psychotic killers. Anyway, the others are now able to move camp there. When they do, a drunk Molly is making a nuisance of herself, trying to get Dutch's attention, before revealing that she in fact ratted them out to the Pinkertons about the bank robbery which got both Hosea and Lenny killed and put them into this big mess. Dutch was ready to kill her on the spot for this betrayal, but Arthur calmed him down. However, he couldn't do anything about Miss Grimshaw, who wasn't having any of it. Sometime later, he receives a letter from Penelope Braithwaite requesting his assistance, and him being his giving self, he took the time out of his busy schedule to pay her a visit. She wants him to escort her to the train station so she and Beau can get out of here, since they're scared that the remainder of their families would lynch them. However, at the station they get jumped by Beau's cousins, so once Arthur knocks them out, they all board the train until they get to the next stop. When they get off the train, Penny offers Arthur a valuable family heirloom, but he refuses it. What use is it to him? He wants them to use it to help start the rest of their lives together. He sees the couple off before running into Mrs. Downs, and she's not doing so hot. She became a prostitute so she could get by. When Arthur asks about her son, she mentions that he became a minor because her mother working is not enough. She says that she's fearful of him getting sick and dying, so Arthur goes to check in on him. He's being picked on by the other workers, and when Arthur stands up for him, they pick a fight with him. So Arthur beats him up and scares them off before giving the boy some cash so he and his mother can go someplace nice. But then, soon after, he runs into the boy again. Turns out his mother doesn't want to leave and she's off whoring again. Archie gives him a location so Arthur rides there and scares off the customer when he starts coughing. That caught Mrs. Downs' attention as it reminded her of her late husband and thinks that she knows why he's doing all this now, for forgiveness. She's reluctant to go back due to her pride, but Arthur convinces her by reminding her to prioritize her son. Once they return to Archie, he gives them a wad of cash, which she refuses. He tells her not to worry, he's not looking for forgiveness so they can take the money so they can live a better life. He's actually doing it just to be a better person. After that, Arthur does some more debt collecting for old Strauss, but when he does, he doesn't look at those people the same anymore. He sees that the people that they take advantage of are the very people that the gang used to help. After the realization sinks in of all this trouble that Strauss has brought to the gang, Arthur packs his bags, gives him some cash, and kicks him out. After that was dealt with, he goes to meet with Sadie to scout out the prison they're holding John in. They use a hot air balloon to get sky high where they spot him. When they get down, however, they get attacked by a bunch of Combs boys because Mrs. Adler's been hunting them down. Once they're all dealt with, Sadie lets Arthur know that the law caught Colm and he's gonna be hanged, but this has happened before and he's escaped, so they need to make sure he swings. But first things first, gotta get John back to his family. Arthur and Sadie row out to the island the prison is situated on. They plan to be in and out pretty quickly, so they sneak onto the watchtower where they look for him amongst the fields. Once they think they found him, they snipe the guards and approach the prisoners. But he's not amongst them, so they get one of the guards at gunpoint and go towards the state penitentiary to ask for John. Luckily they obliged, and although the trio's getaway was messy, they managed. However, as suspected, it was a tad bit tense when John returned to camp, seeing as Dutch hadn't sent for him yet. Dutch thinks that this will bring the law on them faster, and he had a goddamn plan as to when to save John, but he's livid when he sees that obviously Arthur felt different. After a good night's sleep, Mary Beth informs Arthur that Dutch and Micah went to Annesburg to deal with Leviticus Cornwall. When the three of them meet up, Micah mentions that he suspects that there's another rat. Who's to say Molly's the only one? He thinks that the Pinkertons always seem to catch on to what they're doing too fast. It can't just be a coincidence. But anyway, Dutch says getting the Pinkertons off their back is why they're there. They go to negotiate a peace deal with Cornwall. Obviously the guy refused, which is just what Dutch wanted anyway. He has an excuse to kill him now. Dutch believes this will help them out with the Pinkertons since Cornwall was the one that was funding them. Before they escape, they nick some of Cornwall's paperwork indicating he's been making deals with the army and there's a lot of bonds at his oil factory. Dutch intends on creating a distraction so they can steal the bonds before they can be on their merry way. Once Arthur returns to camp, he notices Reverend Swanson packing his bags ready to jump ship. Having turned his alcohol-ridden life around, he leaves with Arthur's blessing. That's when Dutch beckons for Arthur. He preaches to his son that they'll be on their way to New York or Tahiti or someplace nice with dancing girls soon. Their conversation gets interrupted by Charles and Indian Eagle Flies. The army have been making his people suffer, taking everything from them. Even though his father, the chief, wants peace, Eagle Flies is ready to fight. And now that they stole their horses, preventing them to even go hunting, he sees it as a declaration of war by Colonel Favors. And Dutch views this as an opportunity. Of course he does. So as Dutch and Eagle Flies go after the horses, Arthur and Charles follow so it doesn't get out of hand. So together, they all hop onto the boat, kill the men, and free the horses to get them back to the Indians. Dutch was also able to convince Eagle Flies to retaliate before they come for revenge. So Arthur checks in on Rains Fall, Eagle Flies' father, to sort of apologize for Dutch's behavior and explain his loyalty to him. They share a ride together where Arthur opens up about having a son, Isaac, with a random waitress. He supported them both, but one day when he came over, he saw 2 crosses and he knew exactly what that meant. Some guys came over, robbed and murdered them. All for $10. After that's done, he heads over to meet John to set off that distraction Dutch was looking for. They set some explosives on the train tracks and blow it up. The two then discuss that this plan of Dutch's doesn't even really make sense, and about how much he's changed. He doesn't seem to care about anyone else anymore. When Arthur brings up that he feels that he should take his woman and child and go, build a proper life for them, John is hesitant because of how much loyalty means in their code. Arthur responds by saying that they've been loyal their whole lives, but they aren't the ones that have changed. He tells him to run and not look back. To which John says that he'll mull it over. When Arthur gets back to camp, he catches Trelawney just as he's leaving too, so they can say their goodbyes before parting ways. Charles then brings Rains Fall to Arthur as he set up a meeting with Colonel Favors to broker a peace treaty and wants them there. Obviously Colonel Favors wasn't interested and it all went south. Luckily they all escaped with their lives intact. Anyway, Colm's day to get his neck snapped has finally arrived, so Arthur, Dutch and Sadie meet up to make sure it happens. For Annabelle, Sadie's husband, and poor Kieran. They locate a sniper which Arthur takes out, and Dutch and Sadie get the other men at gunpoint. As Colm realizes he isn't getting out of this one, the fear sets into his eyes moments before his neck gets broken. But that's not enough for Sadie, so she kills the 2 that they had at gunpoint. It's safe to say she has a bloodthirst for all things O'Driscoll. So a gunfight breaks loose, forcing Arthur to cover them with the sniper till they fled the scene, before he can join them in returning to camp. The job's not done for Sadie though. She knows where the rest of them are holed up, and she asks Arthur to help her rid the face of the earth of all the O'Driscolls. He accepts under the condition that when shit hits the fan, Sadie helps Arthur get John and his family to safety. He explains how they're both more ghosts than people because of everything that's happened to them. They're dead inside, while John, Abigail and Jack have the potential to live a proper life. When she understands what Arthur's saying, she gladly accepts. So Arthur and Sadie kill every single last one of them, and Sadie savoured the butchering of the one that killed her husband. Arthur and Sadie then share an emotional moment together where she finally gets some closure on what happened before referring to Arthur as the best man she ever met besides her husband when she heads off to spend some time alone. So then Arthur heads off to meet Dutch. Unfortunately, Dutch's cruel plan to divert attention away from the gang and onto the natives is coming to fruition, even with Arthur trying to stop it. They ambush the army and momentarily win until they get reinforcements in that corner them onto the edge of a cliff, which they're forced to leap off to get away. But in the midst of the commotion, Eagle Flies got captured, so Arthur vowed to Rain's Fall that he'd save him. He and Charles ride out to the stronghold where he's being kept captive. On their way, they discuss how it seems that Dutch has changed just like Arthur did with John, and it seems that Charles is on the same page, which is good. The duo stealthily get inside to free Eagle Flies before dynamiting their way out and canoeing away. When Arthur gets back to camp, there are two new faces. Micah brought two friends, Joe and Cleet, who seem just as scummy as him. When Arthur confronts him about it, they get interrupted, as usual. This time by Eagle Flies and his men. He's fuming because the US Army tried to kill his people for oil, so he wants to enact revenge on them. Even with his father pleading with him, he disobeys him, not for the first time, as they head for Cornwall's oil factory. With Rain's Fall begging Arthur to help him, the others follow close behind. When they spot Eagle Flies, Dutch and the others go to set off a distraction, so Arthur, Sadie, Charles and some natives attempt to save the chief's son. They shoot their way through the massacre that Dutch was hoping to happen, so that they can get to Eagle Flies before reuniting with Dutch. This is when Arthur confronts him about not understanding why he's even doing this anymore, but all the doubting is visibly irritating Dutch. Anyway, he tells Arthur that inside that building over there is their ticket out of here, so they both head inside with the rest leaving the area. In an office, Dutch finds a few $1,000s worth of state bonds before they try to get out of there. In doing so, however, Arthur gets surprise attacked, and despite seeing that, Dutch stood and watched before leaving him to die. Luckily, Eagle Flies didn't see Arthur as quite that expendable. He saved him but got shot in the process. Arthur and Charles brought him to Rain's Fall. Unfortunately though, the gunshot was fatal. Charles tells Arthur that the natives need to relocate before the situation gets any worse, and him being part Indian himself, he wants to help them out. So the two embrace before parting ways. When Arthur returns to camp, he doesn't even mention what happened back at the factory. I guess a part of him still hopes that Dutch can come back from this and doesn't want to cause a commotion. Dutch tells Arthur that Pearson, Uncle and Mary Beth all left as well, with Karen nowhere to be seen, to which Arthur says it makes sense because they're all scared. Dutch tells him that there's nothing to be afraid of. All this turmoil is confusing the army and Pinkertons, so one more big score is all they need before they can get on a boat and get out of here. Arthur tells him that he's fine staying as he hasn't got much to lose, but insists that they've got to cut John and his family loose. Dutch doesn't take too kindly to the word insist, but plays along anyway, as they all go to the final heist robbing a train full of army payroll. John's all prepared to jump ship immediately afterwards, with Arthur ready to do whatever it takes for Tilly and Miss Grimshaw to get them out of this mess. Anyway, Arthur and John jump onto the train and shoot and kill to get from carriage to carriage. Since one's on fire, they jump onto Dutch and Bill's respective horses to move ahead to the one after, where John uncouples the carriage before it explodes. While Arthur's assembling the machine gun to take on the patrol, John gets shot off the train. Dutch heads back on the horse to get him so Arthur can focus on mowing down the enemy. When free of the pursuers, they blow up and enter the armoured carriage to retrieve the cash before jumping off the train. Dutch and Micah return without John, saying that the patrol killed him before they could get to him. When they're riding back to camp, they're met by a panicked Tilly on horseback. Agent Milton and his men captured Abigail and is having her tried for murder. Luckily, Tilly managed to grab Jack before fleeing the scene. But Micah, being his slithery self, convinces Dutch that it's not worth it to go through all that trouble to save one woman, even when Arthur rushes off his horse to plead with him. But when they leave with their money, Sadie, being her loyal, badass self, stays by Arthur's side. So Arthur gives his share of the loot to Tilly, telling her to lead a good life, as they both say they're going to miss each other, before she heads off to take Jack someplace safe, and Arthur and Sadie go to get his mother back to him. They see Agent Milton taking her into a building, so Sadie firmly suggests that he cover her with a sniper while she rushes in to free her due to his TB making him physically weaker. Although mildly offended, Arthur obliges. But Sadie gets in some trouble, so Arthur rushes into the building after her. When trying to untie Abigail first, Agent Milton comes out of the shadows with a gun pointed at Arthur. The two get into conversation about how Arthur should have taken up his offer of giving Dutch up, and how Molly ended up snitching on them, but Milton reveals that he's misinformed. They shook her up, but Molly never talked. It was in fact Micah that ratted them out all along. which makes perfect sense. Molly only made a false confession when drunk because she craved Dutch's attention. All of a sudden, a struggle between Arthur and Milton broke out as Abigail freed herself and shot Milton through the skull before cutting Sadie loose. Once they get to safety, they stop because Arthur wants to say his goodbyes to the women before heading back to the camp alone. When Abigail asks about John, he regrettably tells her that he's been killed or he's been captured. But as she's sobbing, he makes sure that she knows that even though he wasn't perfect, John loved her and Jack, he really did. Then Arthur tells her that Sadie would take her to Tilly, who's keeping Jack safe, before he heads back to confront Dutch about Micah's rodent behavior. As expected, when confronted about it, the rat denies it, and as Dutch is racking his brain about all this, John pops in out of nowhere, exclaiming that Dutch left him to die. At this point, everyone picks their side as this is over now. Dutch on the side of the one that he deems hasn't betrayed him, Micah, due to all the sucking up he does, with Bill and Javier following suit of the man that saved them from a bad place. But Miss Grimshaw, obviously not as deluded, is on the other side of the fence, but with Javier mentioning that the Pinkertons are fast approaching, in that split second, Micah shoots Miss Grimshaw. When the Pinkertons attack, Arthur vows to get John to his family if it's the last thing he does, so they start riding away when their loyal steeds get shot. And Arthur made sure to stay by his side to comfort him as he was dying. Then, Arthur followed John up the mountain to get away from the Pinkertons. Fortunately, they don't have to worry about Dutch and the others who are going after the camp's secret stash of money. But, the TB's really catching up to him and he's struggling to breathe. John begs him to keep going, but this is it for him. His last stand. Arthur gives John his hat and his satchel and urges him to go to his family and be a man. Before doing so, however, John makes sure to call Arthur his brother, which Arthur lovingly acknowledges. Then the final showdown commences. Arthur's firing shots at Pinkertons left, right and centre when suddenly he gets tackled by Micah out of nowhere. After a long-awaited brawl with Rat, Micah disarms Arthur of his gun. With his lungs bursting after every breath he takes, Arthur crawls to get to the gun before Micah, but he gets stopped by none other than Dutch, who says that this is over now. When Dutch sees that even when he says that, Arthur still insists that Micah's a rat and isn't changing his stance, it really does get his cogs turning. To which Micah states that Arthur's illness has made him deranged. But Arthur tugs at his heartstrings by telling Dutch that he gave him all he had. Clearly, Micah notices that Arthur's getting through to Dutch, so he says to forget about Arthur, they can still make it. To which Arthur drops the mic by twisting Micah's words and saying that John's the only one that made it, but reiterates to Dutch that he tried his best for everyone else. This got Dutch to realise the error of his ways, but he's not ready to act on it, so he left. Micah went on his way too, leaving Arthur to draw his final breaths facing the sunrise. 7 years after Arthur's passing, we pick up with John, Abigail and Jack. They find decent work at a ranch, with John going under the alias Jim Milton as to not be figured out or tracked down by those who knew him as John Marston. The owner of the ranch lets them stay at the ranch as long as they can provide a hard-working set of hands. John gets stuck in doing all these menial tasks, milking the cows, scooping up animal dung, building a fence, with Jack joining him at times, all to provide Abigail with the peaceful, stress-free life she has been wanting for them. However, one evening, when the family are fast asleep, they are woken to the sound of a commotion. John rushes to check it out. Turns out Mr. Abel attacked the ranch to pressure Mr. Geddes to selling his land to him. John beat up and scared off the men to save Mr. Geddes and the other workers on the ranch. But they had stolen their cattle, so John went back inside to arm himself and go after the cattle against Abigail's wishes. John went and asserted his dominance, dispatched Mr. Abel's men and got the cattle back for his employer. Although Mr. Geddes was grateful, let's just say Abigail wasn't exactly in the mood for spooning that night. The following morning, John gets an unexpected telegram from a certain Sadie Adler, who has tracked him down and wants to discuss something with him, and thus wants him to meet her at the saloon in Valentine if he wants to make some decent money. When he enters the house to tell Abigail about Sadie, he discovers that his beloved has taken their son and left, leaving a letter to tell him that even though she loves him to bits, she can't have her son be around him if he can't change his ways. He doesn't stand around whining about the situation. He immediately says he's gonna save up and get Abigail what she wants. A plot of land up at Beecher's Hope. John pays a visit to the Valentine saloon. There, John finds his old friend Sadie, still just as wild at heart as always. The two hug it out and catch up. Sadie's a bounty hunter now and offers John to split the cash if he helps out with the bounties. And obviously John needs some cash to purchase that plot of land, so he takes her up on that offer. The bounty hunting duo chase down, lasso and hogtie Nathan Kirk so Sadie can take him to the sheriff. But this money isn't enough to get the land, so John gets a loan from the bank. But before he can purchase the land, John pays the illegal tenants to leave, allowing John to sign the paperwork to become a homeowner. While getting ready to leave Blackwater, he runs into another familiar face, Uncle. John explains to him that he's gone straight now, which Uncle struggles to believe. Anyway, when John gets set to head to his new plot of land, Uncle just tags along, saying that he's not well because of his lumbago. John, out of pity, lets him join him in his crappy new home in Beecher's Hope. One of the subsequent days, Uncle, fresh off one of his drunken nights out, informs John that he suspects Charles is still alive in Saint Denis, but is not doing too well by the sound of things. So they hop on a train and ask around once they arrived in the city. They track him down, throwing away some bare-knuckle fights for money, which obviously he's not happy about. Now that John's here to help out, all's good. They both bet on Charles to win, with the odds astronomically high since everyone else is betting against him. The wolf absolutely wrecks the other guy, which obviously pissed off a lot of people who thought he was throwing away the fight. Therefore, they quickly made haste once they collected their reward. The old friends discuss the gang. John mentions how Arthur saved him and his family before dying, which Charles says he got word of. He in fact returned to bury him and Miss Grimshaw. John also tells him that Micah was the rat all along, saying that he has no idea where he or Dutch is, but at the very least hopes that Micah's dead. Charles brought up that he got word that the agents picked up and tortured Strauss, but he never gave up the gang. I guess it showed where his loyalties truly lay, despite getting kicked out. Poor fella died in custody. Anyway, Charles heads up to Beecher's Hope with John and Uncle, where Uncle lets it be known that this isn't a place that Abigail would want to come home to. So they use the horses to bring it down, before heading to town to choose a house straight out of the catalogue at a place called Cakes, Hardwood and Timber, which properly sounds like a porno. They bring everything back to location and immediately start building. After a montage of John and Charles building with Uncle barking orders, the house is ready for them to enjoy. And thus, John is ready to write a letter to Abigail to explain who he has run into and everything he has done in an attempt to impress her. He wants her and the boy to return to him so they can try their hand at ranching. Once the letter's sent off, three of them get drinking and celebrating the feat they accomplished before they all pass out drunk out of their minds. The following day, John is woken up by Charles, who announces that Uncle's nowhere to be seen, and John thinks nothing of it, until Charles reveals a clue suggesting that he was kidnapped by the ruthless and sadistic Skinner Brothers gang. They rush off to save him before it's too late. When they locate Uncle, they kill the Skinner Brothers in the surrounding area before they can free him. The deranged cult have been burning his back above a campfire to torture him. Though in extreme agony, John and Charles manage to get him home so he can recover. After Charles notices that John's anxious, he tells him not to worry too much. They must have killed most of them to save Uncle, so they won't bother coming back. They caused too much trouble for them. Finally, after ages of being apart, John reunites with his family. In an attempt to bond with his son, he takes him fishing just like Arthur did. Although Jack's not particularly a fan of fishing, he enjoyed spending time with his father until his new dog Rufus gets bitten by a snake. But it's all good. John sucks out the poison to save the canine. While John and Abigail are having a tender moment with her telling him how proud she is of him, Jack beckons for them. They have a visitor, Sadie. They all catch up a little, after which Sadie brings up another bounty, and that she might have tracked down Micah. Abigail despises both of these ideas, but she can get over the bounty hunting because it's legal work and they're in debt, so they need the money. As for Micah, it's a flat out no. She doesn't want either of them getting killed going after him. Anyway, John and Sadie ride out to subdue the bounty. On their way, John tells her that he's going to propose to Abigail with the same ring that Arthur proposed to Mary with. It was tucked away in the satchel he gave him the final time they saw each other. Anyway, when they locate the guy, he was hiding away. They get ambushed and have a close encounter with a grizzly where John almost gets eaten alive if not for Sadie. On the ride back to the sheriff with the bounty, Sadie tells John that she's not prepared to let him go bounty hunting with her anymore, because in the thick of it, she doesn't want his wife and son rushing through her head. She also tells John that she herself can deal with Micah, and although John accepts the no bounty hunting, Micah is something he feels he has to do, with or without her help. So when they bring the guy in, Sadie tells John that she'll come to him when she has more concrete information. Back home, Mr. Geddes sends over some furniture as a kind of housewarming gift. John ensures to let them know that they're truly very grateful and that they have friends for life with him and his family. Before organizing the furniture, John and Abigail decide to pay a visit to town. On their way, she notices that John's being unusually courteous, which she both teases him for and enjoys. The couple get their photo taken before going to the pictures where they have a great time. Then, John rows them out to the middle of the lake. The romantic backdrop and the secluded environment was the ideal location to take out Arthur's ring, get on one knee, and ask Abigail to marry him, which she overjoyously accepts. Sometime later, the family are spending quality time together indoors when Charles calls for John to come outside. Sadie has found him. She found Micah. A lead, one of his boys, is wanted for murdering a woman and has been seen in Strawberry. She reckons that he'll lead them to Micah. John starts getting ready against his fiance's wishes. After she begs him on the verge of tears, he explains that all this wouldn't be possible without Arthur, Sadie, or everyone else who fell. He begs her to understand that this is it. He has to do this. John tells Uncle to look after the place as he joins Sadie and Charles in riding towards Strawberry, eager to put a stop to Micah. En route, they discuss what they'll be doing after this. Charles has seen John's life and it inspired him. He might head to Canada to find himself a woman, start a family. While Sadie's more on the work side of things, she might head to South America, run protection for a gold mine, or take up with a handsome revolutionary. But first, they've got business to take care of. They chase down Cleet in Strawberry and get him to spill the beans about where Mike has been hiding out before hanging him. The trio make their way up a snowy mountain where Charles gets sniped. After taking out the sniper, they check on him. He says he'll be fine and to go on ahead. The duo fight their way further up the summit where they get sneaked up at and Sadie gets stabbed while John's preoccupied. Luckily, Charles was following close behind and sawed-off shotguns the guy to save Sadie. Now it's John on his own. He's ready to face Micah. He kills Joe, Micah's other buddy, and shoots his way past all his men before making it to a cabin which Micah pops out of. The two start firing at each other and it's all even Stevens until Sadie comes up behind Micah, and it's all going their way until Dutch reveals himself. Micah uses that split second that their attention was diverted to wrestle the injured Sadie and get her at gunpoint. With Dutch pointing his gun at John, he asks his former leader what he's doing here, to which he responds, "Same as you," which is ominous to say the least. But Micah butts in to mention that he and Dutch are teaming up once again. Dutch tells his son that he betrayed him, to which John says that he could say the same about him. But John repeats the same phrase Arthur did to Dutch before his death, that they all did their utmost for him. It ain't their fault that things turned out the way it did, causing Dutch to shoot the rat, giving John the opening to fire round after round into his skull. Before John can even thank Dutch, he gives him a look of disgust and just heads off. It seems that even though he came to put an end to Micah too for manipulating him by constantly feeding his ego and destroying the harmony of the gang, he also has a sense of animosity for John. Anyway, Sadie mentions that they have the Blackwater money that they stashed away after the robbery gone wrong at the beginning, hidden away in that cabin. Goes to show even more that Dutch wasn't here for the money. After John gets the moolah, he and Sadie get Charles and return home. Besides, they've got a wedding to attend. Relieved that they all made it back and it was all over, Abigail embraced John, ready to get the ceremony started. After the wedding, Sadie and Charles said their goodbyes to the family and went on their merry way. But wait, remember what Arthur told John? To run and not look back. The game ends with a shot of Agent Ross, who has tracked down John because he went after Micah, who was an informant for them and was going to give them Dutch. And thus begins the events of the first game. Thanks so much for watching the video. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video. It really does help more people see the video. Comment your thoughts on the story and subscribe with notifications on for more story summaries from me. See ya.